Hey guys, it's Sam with The Blind Life. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about setting up an iPhone or an iPad to work the best with low vision. Now, I'm going to be showing you this on my iPad, but all of this can be applied to an iPhone as well. If you like this kind of content, be sure to like and subscribe. I post videos like this every single Saturday. I'm on a mission to reach 100,000 subscribers this year, and with your help, I can reach my goals. Just click the subscribe button down below. It's 100% free, it doesn't cost you anything, but it's gonna help me reach my goals, and I appreciate that. All right, first thing we need to do is get into our settings. You should have an icon somewhere on your device for settings. If you can't find it, you can also ask Siri to open settings.
Home screen and multitasking, display and brightness, button.
First thing we wanna do is go down to display and brightness.
Display and brightness, heading.
And we want to choose which appearance we want, whether we want light or dark. Now, I prefer dark, and what that means is the background is dark and the text is a light color, in most cases a white color. This tends to be a little bit easier on the eyes. It adds a lot of great contrast, but this is a very personal choice. You can try the light theme or you can try the dark theme and just pick whichever one looks the best for you.
Selected, automatic, off.
We want to go ahead and turn automatic off.
Text size, button.
Text size we'll come back to later.
Bold text, off.
Come back to that as well.
Brightness, heading.
Brightness. A lot of times when I'm working with a client and I'm looking at their device, it's just too dark. They have the brightness set too low. So I always encourage people to set the brightness higher. For a lot of us, more light is going to be better, so brighten up your screen.
Screen brightness, 100. True tone, off.
True tone, I turn that off. I don't want the device to make any of the decisions for me regarding brightness and colors. I want to set those to work the best for me, and then I want it to just stay that. So I turn off true tone.
Display zoom, larger text, button.
Display zoom. If you have a device that has a larger screen like my 12-inch iPad or one of the larger iPhones, then you'll have this option. And of course, you want to set that to large.
Selected, larger text. Default.
Obviously, this just makes the elements on the screen larger, and of course, that's going to be better for us.
Selected, done, button.
All right, let's jump into home screen and multitasking.
Home screen and multitasking. Use large app icons, on.
Right there at the top, use large app icons. Once again, if you have one of these larger displays, you should have this option, and we want to turn that on.
Show app library in dock, off. Show suggested and recent apps in dock, off.
Now, this is also a personal preference, but I usually turn these off. Show app library in dock and show recently downloaded icons or programs in the dock. Once I set this device up, I want it to stay the way I set it up. I don't want things to just randomly change. And this is one of those items that just randomly changes when you least expect it. So I want to turn those off personally. Once again, personal preference. The next thing, before we get into our accessibility settings, we want to jump into wallpaper. We generally recommend that you put on a high contrast, dark, not busy wallpaper. And I'll explain the thought behind that. If I had a picture of my wife and my kids and my dog and all of that, or a picture of a mountain or a cityscape, that would be great. It's really cool, but that very busy, brightly colored background would make it hard for me to see my icons on the home screen. My icons and my shortcuts would get lost in that busy background. I want to mitigate that by adding in a dark wallpaper. Because as we always say, contrast is king. A dark wallpaper will allow my shortcuts and my icons to stand out and jump off the screen and be much easier to see. You can go with a pure black wallpaper. You don't have to though. Mine is kind of a red, abstract, blurry background, but it still gives great contrast, and that's what's most important.
Accessibility, heading.
All right, now let's jump into accessibility. This is where we're gonna do the bulk of our work here.
Vision, voiceover, on.
We're gonna come back to voiceover.
Zoom, on, button.
Let's jump into zoom and turn that on.
Zoom, accessibility.
Lots of settings in here. We're really only gonna be mainly focused on two of them. We're gonna go down.
Follow focus. Smart typing. Off. Zoom region. Full screen zoom. Button.
Zoom region.
Pin zoom. Zoom. Back button.
Now, I generally set this to full screen zoom. That's just the way I've always used it. I think it's the best because it utilizes the full screen size of your device, but you do have a couple options in here.
Zoom region. Pin zoom.
Pin zoom just pins a little area that gets magnified.
Selected. Full screen zoom. Window zoom.
And window zoom is basically like you have a little magnifying glass that you can move around and magnify a certain area. But whichever one you choose, the way to initiate it by default, there are some other ways to do that, and we'll might get into that in a future video, but the basic way to zoom in is to use a 3-finger double tap. So tap twice on the screen with 3 fingers. I use my index, middle, ring finger, but it does not matter. Double tap and it zooms in, and then I use those same 3 fingers to move the screen around. If this is too big or if this is not big enough, I can use the same 3 fingers, do a double tap, and then on that second tap, I leave my fingers down and I slide up or down. Sounds a little complicated and at the beginning, a lot of people have a hard time getting all 3 fingers down at the same time, but with a little practice, it becomes second nature. Tap, tap, and slide on that second tap. And I can set this magnification to whatever level I want, and then from that point on, it zooms into that magnification level. The other option we want to check out in here is the maximum zoom level. By default, it's really only set about half as big as it can get. So you can come in here and adjust this slider and magnify even more than you could by default. All right, still in the accessibility settings, let's jump into display and text size.
Bold. Accessibility. Back. Larger text. On. Button. Bold text. Off. Display. Bold text. Off.
First, we have bold text. You can turn this on. I don't do that for my own personal device, but like I said, personal preference, you can choose it if you want to.
Larger text. On. Larger display and
larger text. This allows you to set the text even larger than we could back in the display settings that we were in before. That's why I said we wanted to wait at that point. We wanted to come back to it later because in here we can make them even larger. And you've got a little slider here.
Adjustable.
And as you slide up or down,
82%, 73%, 64%.
You get a little display example here of the text size.
70, 80, 91%.
And just set it to whatever looks good for you. You can always come back in and change it at a later time.
Larger text on/off labels. Button shapes on.
Button shapes
on/off labels.
On and off labels.
Reduce transparent on/.
These are personal preferences. You can try those, turning them on, turning them off. It just affects the way that buttons look and labels look, adds a little bit higher contrast to them. This is one of those things that is going to be different for everyone.
Reduce transparency.
Reduce transparency. I recommend turning this on. Some elements of your iPhone and your iPad have transparent elements to them, like the notification shade. When you pull that down, the back of it is kind of semi-transparent. It's like a frosted pane of glass. So you can kind of see the home screen below it. And that might make it difficult for some people to see the words, the letters, the text on that notification shade. Once again, it's all about contrast. So having transparencies turned on might cause low contrast. So I always turn it off. That way it's going to give you the best contrast.
Increase contrast. On.
And then speaking of contrast, the very next option is a way to increase contrast. So yes, we want to turn that on.
Increase color. Differentiate without color. Off.
Color contrast is a thing, and some elements will utilize color contrast to imply something important. Think of on Amazon, the buy and the add to cart and the buy buttons are very bright yellow buttons because they want to draw your eye, draw your attention over there to click on those buttons. That is a good use of color contrast. Well, if you have certain vision impairments where you don't see colors as well, you can turn this off and it will use other methods to convey that important information. I don't have that problem, so I leave this on. I want color contrast. Color contrast is good for me.
Smart invert, off. Smart invert or classic invert, off.
We have two invert options, smart invert and classic invert. If you want to use those, you can. You can turn those on. That just inverts the colors on the screen. I generally don't have mine turned on because I'm using my dark mode, and that does the same thing. But we will come back and talk about where you can turn that on very quickly if you run into a situation where you do need inverted.
Color filter.
All right, color filters. If you have any kind of color blindness or anything like that, you can go in here and play with those.
Reduce white point, off.
Reduce white points. If you are sensitive to bright white things, you can do that and it will tone down the bright white points of certain elements.
Reduce the intent, auto brightness, off.
Auto brightness, turn that off. Once again, I don't want the device making any decisions for me regarding brightness or colors or contrast, anything like that. So I turn off auto brightness.
Accessibility, display,
All right,
and
back
text.
to the main accessibility settings.
Motion, button, reduce, accessibility, reduce motion, on.
Now, in the motion section, I don't do much in here, but you can go through here and play around with these. Some things like reduce motion, some of these elements have transitions. Just like when I clicked into this menu, it kind of slid in from the side. That's just a transition animation. You can turn those off. If those affect you, you don't like those, you can turn those off.
Spoken content, button. Speak accessibility, speak selection, off.
All right, spoken content. This is an area that might be helpful for a lot of people. So right now I'm using Voiceover just so you guys can hear the options as I'm interacting with them. Some people in the visually impaired community don't want a full screen reader. Voiceover is a full screen reader. It reads everything. But maybe you don't need that. Maybe you just need sometimes screen reader, some elements read out loud. Well, spoken content, you have some different options.
Speak selection, off.
Speak selection. This is one of those sometimes reading options.
Speak screen, off.
Speak screen, that's another one. For a full review, or I guess overview of all of these different options, check out my video where I cover all the different text-to-speech options on iOS. I will link that in the video description down below. But for now, we're going to skip this. You guys can come back in here and check out these things later.
Accessibility, audio descriptions, off.
Audio descriptions, I would recommend turning this on. This simply just automatically turns on any audio descriptions that might be available. So if you're watching a movie on your device through like Apple TV, it would automatically play the audio descriptions. Okay, we're gonna jump all the way to the bottom.
Voice control, off. But sound accessibility shortcut, Voiceover.
Down to accessibility shortcut.
Accessibility.
So this is a hardware shortcut that you can turn on an accessibility option or multiple accessibility options. For me, with my iPad, this is the 2020 model, so it still has the home button. This would be a triple click of the home button. If you're on a newer device that doesn't have a home button, it's a triple click of the side button. So click, click, click. For me, I have it set for Voiceover, so if I triple click my home button here, click, click, click.
Voiceover off.
It automatically turns off Voiceover. If I click it again, click, click, click.
Voiceover on.
It
Settings.
turns on Voiceover. So you can set one or multiple options that correspond with that triple click of the home button. This is an easy way, quick, easy way to turn these things on and off. I only have Voiceover, but like I said, you can set multiple options, but I caution that because, okay, let's say I choose Classic Invert and I already have Voiceover turned on or chosen as well for my triple click. Now I have two options. So when I triple click the button, click, click, click.
Alert. Accessibility shortcuts.
I get a window pops up asking like which one I want to trigger.
Classic invert. Selected. Voiceover button.
So this is why I usually recommend that you only have one option, because with low vision, I don't want to have to struggle to see that little window that pops up and choose which one I want. That can be difficult. So if I just have one option chosen, it makes it much easier.
Voiceover on.
Now, the only other option we want to kind of go over a little bit is Voiceover. I'm not going to go in depth into Voiceover. It's a huge program and kind of deserves its own video. But this is also something that we would normally turn on for most low vision users. As I said before, Voiceover is the full screen reader for iOS products. For some of you, you might not need a full screen reader, but I will say that it comes in very handy. I use mine quite often. I'm often using Voiceover and a magnifier at the same time, just because it gives me that dual input, right? I get an audible confirmation of what I'm looking at, and it helps to reinforce what that is. So if you think that could be helpful for you, I definitely recommend checking it out. Keep in mind that Voiceover needs some training. When Voiceover is turned on, you interact with your device completely different than when it's turned off. So I recommend getting some training with an actual trainer or jumping into the Voiceover tutorial and practicing. And then finally, 2 more things to talk about. I definitely recommend going in and setting up where your shortcuts are located on your home screen. Put all of your most important, mostly used icons on your #1 home screen and get rid of the ones that you don't care about. That's going to make it much easier for you to navigate. If you're always going into Facebook or YouTube, put those on this first screen. And don't forget that your dock stays consistent no matter what screen you're on. So your really important icons, put those down in the dock because they will always be there. And then finally, on some devices, you also have a new accessibility feature called Back Tap. And Back Tap is a new way to add 2 more accessibility shortcuts. And it simply lets you tap once or twice on the back of your device to trigger an accessibility shortcut. I don't have it on this old iPad, but don't worry, I have a whole video walking through Back Tap and how to set it up. I will include that in the video description down below as well. But that's it, guys. This is the 2024 version of how to set up an iPhone or an iPad to work the best with low vision. If you need more information about this type of subject or anything having to do with accessibility or blindness in general, check out my other videos. I post new content to my YouTube channel and my podcast, The Blind Life Podcast, every single Saturday. But that's it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Sam with The Blind Life. I'll see you next time.